Okay, so this is number 5 off of the 6.1, 6.2 quiz review. The first thing you want to start with is you want to try to find your zeros. These are also called x-intercepts. The x-intercepts happen when y is 0. So to make y 0, a value of 0 here would cause that to happen. A value of -1 here would cause that to happen. And a value of -3 here would cause that to happen. So for this particular function, our zeros are 0, -1, and -3. So over here, my zeros are 0, -1, and -3. So when I come to graph this, I know it's going to go through at 0, it's going to go through at -1, and it's going to go through at -3. Now another thing we talked about in class is that if this is positive, that means we start at the top left. So I'm going to start at the top left, okay? And then I know that this graph has to go through this point, but it's got to turn back around to come through this point, come back around to come through this point, and it ends up coming down. So that's about what your graph's going to look like. So now we just have to answer the different features of this graph. So it asks me, how many turning points does it have? Remember, a turning point is where does this thing change direction? Well, it changes direction in two spots. So the answer for this one is 2. Local maximums. For this worksheet, I didn't want you to worry about absolute maximum and absolute minimums. I just want you to worry about where are the maximums, where are the minimums. So maximums, in this situation, there's 1. In this situation, there's 1 minimum. Now remember, positive intervals. Positive intervals are where we're above the x-axis. So for this graph, I'm above the x-axis in this piece, and I'm above the x-axis in this piece. Remember, for these, you need to be using your x values because we are writing an interval. We are using interval notation to describe pieces of a graph. So my positive interval, this one, would go from -infinity, because over here my x's are negative. So it goes from -infinity all the way to -3. So my first one goes -infinity to -3. Now there are 2 because there's another piece right here. This piece goes from -1 to 0. So you would just say and -1 to 0. You do not use brackets on these. The reason you don't use brackets is because we are not sitting on the x-axis. If I was sitting on the x-axis, I would not be above it. So for negative intervals are below. So that happens here and that happens here. So we would say from -3 to -1. And then we would say from 0 to positive infinity. Now I know you're probably thinking negative infinity because it goes down. But remember, we're using our x values. The x values, when I'm moving in this direction, are positive infinity. So my answer is going to be from 0 to positive infinity. Again, no brackets. Okay, so this is number 5 on your 6.1, 6.2 quiz review.